the river. Each tribe has to have its story of the whole world. Humans are the only cosmologists. And this is a little cosmological story from a small tribe in Brazil. Once upon a time, once you could say, in a time like this time, it happened that the world got overheated and there was nothing to stop the overheating of the world. Global warming on a massive scale, nothing interrupted. And so what happened? The earth began to burn. And soon everything was being turned into ashes. The forest reduced to nothing but ash. The animals, unable to escape the flames burning in all directions, reduced to nothing but ash. And eventually, shocking to say, human beings getting caught in the fire of that time were reduced to ash as well. So there was nothing left of the entire planet except ashes in all directions. And everything and everyone was gone except for two beings who happened to be out of the world at the time the world went on fire. They happened to be in the other world. Do you know about the other world? The other world exists right next to this world. It's the world of eternity. It's the world of imagination and ongoing creation. It's the world from which this world comes. This world is only the front of the world, and the other world is the world behind this world. And those two beings, named Ikanshu and Shuna, happen to be visiting in the other world while this world burned up, and therefore they were not consumed by the fires. They were continuing to live. And they were kind of like human beings, but it was a long time ago when the animals and the humans were really close to each other, so they were also like bird beings. They were like birds and they were like humans. At any rate, they decided to go back home, and they were now flying over the surface of the earth, and they were looking for their home. But no matter where they looked, all they could see was ashes everywhere. And they didn't know where home was, and they were beginning to fall into a kind of sadness and despair, because people are always looking for a home. And at that point, the trickster, oh yeah, the trickster survived fire as well. Don't forget that. It takes good tricks to survive a time of dissolution. The trickster came and said, you know, if while you're flying your index finger walks down and points down to the ground, it will be pointing at your home. Now, I don't know how it was. They were flying and had index fingers. It's an old story. You just have to go along with it. So now the two of them were flying, waiting for their index fingers to point down, and sure enough, at a certain point, their fingers began to point down. There's a lesson in that. Home is down. Down in the earth, down in the soul, down in the cage of knowledge. And so they began to descend to the ground. And when they descended to the ground, they began to look for food, because as soon as you become manifest in the grounded world, you want to eat. They were looking around in the ashes for food, but couldn't find any until Ikanshu's foot hit on something hard, and he reached down into the ashes and pulled that something out. He looked at it, it was a piece of charcoal. It occurred to him that charcoal, although it had been part of a growing tree at one point, was not something you could eat. But he was holding it in his hand anyway, and he was thinking, you know, trees were also the source of drums. And this piece of charcoal just might be like a drum. And since I can't eat, I might as well begin to play this piece of charcoal like a drum. And so Ikanshu, there in the ashes at the end of the world, began to play the piece of charcoal like a drum. And as long as he was drumming, he thought, I might as well dance. And so Ikanshu began to dance in the ashes at the end of the world by playing on the drum. And as long as he was drumming and dancing, he thought, I might as well sing. And now up again, and he looked around, and there were the ashes. And there was that piece of charcoal laying in the ashes, and as he looked at that charcoal, he could see a green tendril growing from it, and he quickly realized what had happened. Because he was singing and dancing and playing the charcoal like a drum, he had affected that sound from the beginning and the reverberation and the echo of creation, and it had awakened a deep green imagination inside the black charcoal. I told you black does matter. And now the green light was coming out of the dark charcoal, and he consciously knew that what he had to do was dance around that charcoal and sing to that charcoal, and that's what he did. And soon enough, the green tendril began to grow, and it grew straight up, and it grew thicker, and it became a stem, and pretty soon that stem became a trunk, and pretty soon that little green tendril that had grown out of the charcoal, that had been laying in the ashes of the end of the world, that tendril turned into the tree of life, and he constantly was standing there, dancing there, sitting there, looking at the tree of life, which is the tree behind all the trees and all the flowers, the tree that connects all people through the roots and branches, the very tree of life come back from the ashes of the world. And at that point, while he was dancing and celebrating that, his foot hit something hard in the ashes, and he stopped. And as he stopped, he reached down into the ashes, and he found this time a rock in the ashes. And here he was in the ashes at the end of the world, standing before the tree of life with a rock in his hand. And it occurred to him, what should I do with this rock? What do you do with a rock when you're near the tree of life? He didn't really know, and an instinct or an intuition in him said, well, throw it at the tree. I know this could be disturbing to people who are trying to build an ecological movement. The idea of throwing trees at the tree of life could be a little bit counter-wisdom. But you have to understand, it was the end of the world and the ashes were everywhere, and tricks of all kinds were needed, and instincts of all kinds were also important. And so, Ikanshu took the rock and he threw it at the tree of life, and it hit a branch on that tree, and that branch fell from the tree of life into the ashes, and for a moment it disappeared into the ashes, and a moment after that it began to rise up from the ashes and grow into a tree itself, and pretty soon that branch had become a tree. And so Ikanshu looked for another rock and threw it at the tree of life, and knocked down another branch. That branch in the ashes turned into a tree. He did it again, and he did it again, until all the species of trees were coming back and growing right from the ashes at the end of the world. And then Ikanshu kept dancing. He kept singing. And pretty soon the trees turned into the forest again, and the forest began to spread in all directions. And once the forest had grown back, the animals began to appear as well. And pretty soon the birds were flying through the branches, and all the animals were soft-footing it on the earth. And after a time, the people came back. The human beings came back as well, and pretty soon everyone was back in the world the way they used to be, all together, the plants and the animals and the people. And they say that's how the earth came back after global warming had turned everything into ashes. And the people that have this story, once a year they get together and they stand before certain fruit trees, and they take rocks, and they throw rocks at the fruit on the tree. And when the fruit falls to the ground, they pick it up and they give it to each other. And specifically, they give a piece of fruit to anyone they have offended, or anyone who has offended them, until all the people are coming together again. Through the fruit of the tree of life, through the fruit of knowledge, through the rhythm, and through the dance, and through the song, because they begin to all sing together in order to carry on the reverberation of creation, which is secretly going on inside the body and inside the mind of everyone who's living, no matter whether it's the high time or the low time, the bright time or the dark time, even if it's the ashes at the end of the world. So that's the story from a little child by the Amazon River that did a lot of thinking about what happens when climate change comes, when the world gets too hot, when people forget what it is to have a soul.